Okay, well, welcome everyone. This is the Sierra Club Community Conversations we've been holding since right about March. Well, first official one was April 1st, which was a conversation about the Green New Deal. We've had some other conversations about the priority of the Climate Caucus, the Transportation Climate Initiative, educating the youth around Earth Day, May Day rally, and last week we did a discussion, actually I'm forgetting about, with the Jared Duvall, the Energy Action Network. All those conversations are gonna be posted on our YouTube channel. Ask me later on and I'll share that particular link with you, how to access those particular videos. Tonight's is the future of public transportation, where we're joined by Jen Wood of Green Mountain Transit, and we'll be joined by Representative Kurt McCormick, who's also the chair of the Transportation Committee in the Vermont House. I just want to talk about some quick little logistics. Please make sure your microphone is muted so we don't have any background noise. If you want, you can submit any questions in the chat box. We will try to read it, or we'll unmute you so the conversation can be asked live. You also can raise the hand feature. If you have any information, links or anything, you can add it to the chat box and we can see that. Anything other. You can also turn off your video camera while watching, so we're not like being delayed by anything. So at this actually a point, I actually want to recognize that we have Steve Crowley from the Vermont Sierra Club on board. Steve is actually our political committee chair and the chair of our energy committee, and Jack Cushman, who's of the Upper Valley group, and he'll be asking some questions later on in the presentation. So with that, I want to actually introduce quickly Jen Wood of Green Mountain Transit. And actually, I've met Jen well before she started working with Green Mountain Transit, because she was an activist around climate emissions. So it's kind of a breath of fresh air, having somebody working at a transit agency who understands it based on climate logistics, is not just talking about public transit for other reasons, understands why we need to commit to continuing in this. So to continue this conversation, I'm just going to leave it to Jen to talk about how she's experiencing the future of public transit with Green Mountain Transit. And then afterwards, we'll have Representative Kurt McCormick speaking with us. So Jen, please take it over and talk what you may need to say.
All right, thank you, Rob, and thank you for that introduction. That is exactly why I took the job. Basically, transportation, as I'm sure everybody here knows, is Vermont's biggest carbon emissions footprint by far, and most energy burden for Vermonters. So thank you for that intro, and thank you the Sierra Club for hosting this. I also want to thank Representative Kurt McCormick, who's going to join us today. So what I'd like to do is just share a little bit about GMT, who we are, and what we've been doing as part of the pandemic. And then I'm really excited about hearing Kurt's comments, and also this questions about where people are thinking and talking about the future. So we are GMT, Green Mountain Transit, is technically a municipality. It's the first and only transit authority in the state of Vermont. We're governed by a 13-member board of commissioners, and we service basically the northwest portion of Vermont. So Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Isle, Lamoille, and Washington counties. And we also service the towns of Washington, Williamstown, and Orange. And we have other routes that kind of go down into Middlebury, but that's not our main service area. And our mission is to promote and operate safe, convenient, accessible, innovative, and sustainable public transportation, and particularly that reduces congestion and pollution, that supports transit-oriented development, and that enhances the quality of life for all. So in our service area in Chittenden County, that's what we call our urban area, we have a number of different offerings. We have commuter routes and ADA paratransit, as well as senior shuttles to supermarkets that go from senior housing complexes to supermarkets, and what we call our neighborhood special, which is getting students in and around Burlington to and from school. In our rural area, similarly, we have local routes, commuter routes, and we also provide services for seniors and persons with disabilities, and we have an on-demand or demand response program for medical appointments. So GMT generally, now our ridership is down, but generally we represent 50% of all transportation, public transportation ridership in Vermont, a lot of that being in Chittenden County. And then the other 50% is covered throughout the rest of Vermont, where there are 7 other different transit agencies across Vermont. So I want to talk a minute about just how our funding works. So we get 80% of our funds through either state and federal grants. And then we're required to get the remaining 20% portion through a local match. And that can come in a number of fashions. It comes through fair revenue. It comes from private businesses and institutions giving dollars, and also municipalities. And it works a little bit different between our urban and rural service areas. So in the urban area, for example, we have a number of member towns. So towns can sign on to be members, and then they're voting members as well in the commission. And they are annually assessed. So we have what we call the fair share equation, which takes into consideration a number of factors. We do an assessment and we annually go to each town and say, here's what you owe for your fair share for the year. And they're required through the power of taxation to pay that, that amount. And it generally goes up about 3% a year. And then on the rural areas, which is more where I've been focusing my efforts, is a little bit different, and it's different for each town. So I work with each town and select board and the voters to, we also do a fair share equation, but the request process is different, and each town has different requirements. So we will submit requests, but they're not at all obligated or required by law the same way the urban towns are to provide that. So it's really at the town's discretion. Sometimes the select board makes that determination, and then sometimes a lot of times it's on town meeting day that the voters choose if they want to support whatever amount has been brought forward. So now I want to talk a little bit about the pandemic and what we've been doing, and just in the same way that it has been constantly evolving and shifting, we've been doing that and modifying our operations to deal with the constantly changing circumstances which we all find ourselves in. So as you can imagine, as I said earlier, ridership is down. It's actually down 75%. And it's interesting because we're essentially having to do the opposite of what we normally do. Normally we want to encourage ridership. My goal has been to expand ridership as much as possible all across our service area and all across Vermont. And but we're, because of the challenges that we're facing, we're having to be one right now, just only asking people to ride if they really need to. So that's essential trips, whether it's essential for somebody to get to and from work, or for, say, an essential medical appointment. So we're kind of restricting and asking people to just only ride if you need to, and at the same time then having to track ridership daily. So we literally have daily counts that one of our planners is submitting information to, so that we know what the demand is, and we can meet that with as I'm saying, being inefficient, because we want to make sure there's enough space on the buses. So we're tracking that very closely, and we've actually shifted. There used to be just there weren't any requirements, but now we have, in terms of passengers, but now, for instance, one of our big 40-foot buses is maximum 18, but we're again tracking that so that we're able to keep up with the kind of the demand capacity. And our admin staff, folks like me, are able to work from home. But safety, as I'm sure you can imagine, has been a major component. So one of the first things that we did was go fare free. That really protects both the drivers and the passengers, because I'm sure you know that the fare box is right up next to the driver, and instead of having to deal with money and fiddle with that, we just eliminated that component. And then with that, for any bus, the bigger buses where it's possible, we've asked passengers to board in the back of the bus unless somebody needs the the lift, the accessible lift. Otherwise, we're just having folks board from the back. And when they do that, you'll see signs with all the questions and requirements about there's certain things that make you unable to ride the bus. For instance, if you are experiencing COVID or have COVID or have recently been around somebody. So there are questions that we ask you to look at each time before you board. and to not board if you meet any of those criteria. Some of the other things we're doing is, so we have kind of the more industrial strength sanitizers, and that's happening 2 times a day on the buses. And then of course the drivers are provided with their own tools, wipes and spray bottles, so that they can wipe down any surfaces that they want to at any point on the ride. And also, of course, they're given masks. And after an executive order in the beginning of May, starting May 2nd, GMT put in the requirement that all passengers need to wear masks. So if somebody shows up and doesn't have one, we can provide a mask for a passenger. Now, the last kind of big thing that I wanted to talk about is funding now with the CARES Act. So you may have heard that Vermont got $21 million through the Federal CARES Act. And so 7 million of that came straight to GMT for the urban portion, Chittenden County service area. And the rest of that money is being allocated through the state, through VTrans, for all the rest of the rural providers. So our portion of the rural system, as well as all the other providers who service Vermont. And I think a lot of those details are still being sorted through, and Kurt may have some updates that I don't have. But I know there's some pieces where I know some of those dollars are going. So for instance, we obviously have a loss in revenue from fares, so we're able to put money towards that. And one of the pieces that I'm proud of is we're actually giving hazard pay to the drivers and mechanics on the front line. So they're getting an extra $3 an hour right now for doing this essential service. And then, as I'm sure you can imagine, there's additional operational expenses with just more time sanitizing, cleaning, preparing, and dealing with the challenges that we're facing. So funds to go towards that. It seems that maybe some of them could end up helping with the local matches that I was talking about, where towns may not have the capacity to give what they in previous years have given. And as I understand it, the expectation is that these funds are going to help through the end of our fiscal year 21, which actually it starts this July and goes through next June, 2021. And so I think, again, there's VTrans is sorting through other ways in which those funds will be dispersed, but it's sort of making up the losses and making sure that all Vermont public transit agencies can continue the essential service that we're doing. And so I just, again, want to thank the frontline drivers and folks that are doing this service. And I'll just end with 2 kind of informational pieces. One is, I'm happy to talk about it today or any other time. We're putting together a survey because one, we want to know what the riders in the community feel about what has and has not been working in this process. And also, as we look to the future and anticipate as states in this state starts opening up more and there will be more riders, what are going to be things that riders will make them feel more comfortable. We're expecting, that some people are going to be maybe a bit more reticent to ride. And I think a lot of folks here have been on a lot of conversations with me before in terms of, some of the challenges and barriers and cultural factors that we're facing before COVID to try to get more public transportation engagement. And so hopefully that will shift, but we have this other layer on top of that to contend with. So if anybody has thoughts on that, please share. In the chat, I'll put in a little bit, we have an info@ridegmt.com email address, which you can submit to anytime for questions and comments that you may have, or if you have something particular to the survey. And then I just wanted to make sure people were aware, on our website, we have one page dedicated to COVID and all the changes in which, where bus routes have been shifted or eliminated or restricted. And then there's also all of our social media channels. You can get updates, and there's ways to get email or text messages. So I just want to pause there and, look forward to talking about the future and folks' questions about where we can go with public transportation in Vermont. And now I believe I'm passing it back to Steve. So thank you.
Actually, no, Jen, passing it back to me. So.
Oh, sorry, Rob. I see.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for your time in talking about that. But before we introduce Kurt McCormick, I want to launch a particular poll just to see how much people here have been riding on public transportation prior to COVID-19. Basically, is it your primary mode of transportation? I know before I give the formal introduction to Kurt McCormick, I know it is his primary mode of transportation. Myself, I will ride it when it's convenient, when traveling longer distance, but because I live in Montpelier, I walk to my office, so I don't use it for work. But I do it when I'm traveling some longer distance, particularly to Burlington. So I just want to get a feel of how many people are, and just kind of get this thought process in what we do to increase public ridership amongst all of us. So it's something that we just kind of take for granted is the bus routes that are out there. They're not just there for aesthetic reasons, they're there for us to use. So just another 30 seconds. Can everybody who else is on, please add to it? And then I'll share the results on that. And I'm almost up to the total. There's 3 more people who are logged in who haven't participated yet. And okay, well, 5 more seconds. And okay, 14 out of 16 people have entered it. So I am going to share the results on the screen just to so people can see that is 1 out of 14 primary mode of transportation. 4 of you do for work when it's convenient, 5 of us when traveling long distance using Greyhound or Amtrak, and when visiting cities, and barely ever, 3 of us. So just kind of let's kind of figure out how we can increase our usage of public transit. And that's one of the things I asked Representative Kurt McCormick to join us to talk about today. And Representative McCormick, just kind of give some people's background, is one of the few representatives out there who actually doesn't drive and takes the public transportation himself. I've had the pleasant experience where in Montpelier, when the legislature is in session, he actually happens to live he actually lived next door to me, and he actually had borrowed my bicycle a bunch of times because he didn't have his own bicycle. So it's one of those rare instances where I actually was helping somebody else by sharing my bicycle. But anyway, to bring on this conversation, I am just going to let Kurt do his introduction. But why I invited him to participate in this conversation is he pushed me to be on the Agency of Transportation study about increasing public transit ridership. So the Agency of Transportation released a report last year about how ways we can do it. So I think he is one of the best people in this state to be able to speak on this particular topic, because he doesn't just advocate for it, he lives it and pushes people into thinking about it. So Representative Kurt McCormick, can you join us? I am waiting. There he is.
I had to unmute. Yeah, I was having that problem today. We were in session, and I'm actually used to having Zoom meetings where I'm the chair, so I keep forgetting that I'm muted. Thank you, Rob. And it's really not just a pleasure, but a privilege to be sharing this tonight with Jen Wood, who I think is the perfect person that we need in Vermont to promote this mode of transportation. And so thank you, Jen. Thank you for being here. I think I need to say, Rob, if it's okay before I begin, that you have asked me not to talk about legislation, right? Because just
yeah, correct. We want you to actually speak about what your experiences are about increasing public transit and the role of like any of the money coming in the federal government and how it's coming into play in Vermont. But you can answer people's questions if people have any related towards legislative matters.
Okay, but I should not be pushing legislation, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Thank you, Kurt.
You may have to feel free to interrupt me when you think that's just what I'm doing, because it's possible. I'll do my best, though. Okay. But Rob did ask me to talk about just living without an automobile in Vermont, in a rural state, and obviously how important transit is. So um, sometimes someone will write a letter to the editors about how, well, if you live in Burlington, then you can take a bus. If you live in a rural area, then you can't. There are none, or there are very few. And I think the first point we made about that is that, of course, that's true, but I wasn't born in this little urban area, this microcosm city here in Vermont. I moved here because of things like transit, because I already knew that GMT had a good system running that really didn't exist in other places. When I lived in Rutland, I did have an automobile. I keep a driver's license today. It's in my wallet. And in case I need to drive, it's amazing. It doesn't happen much. And my partner won't even let me drive her car because got it behind the wheel one night and she thought I couldn't see well enough. And that was about 5 years ago, no kidding. And I haven't been behind the wheel of that car since. So I really haven't driven in, it's probably, that was the last time, about 5 years. So I want to say that it's not that I'm an automobile hater. As a matter of fact, Representative Mary Sullivan, who I see is with us tonight, she could, I think, agree with me that on our committee of 11 people, staff as well, which are more people, I probably know more about automobiles than anybody in the room. And used to love them. Used to absolutely love them. The day my driver's license came in the mail, I was 17 years old. That day, two friends and I hopped in my Volkswagen bus and started from Queens, New York for San Francisco, of course, because that's what we were all doing in those days. But the day my license arrived, that's what we did. And so I think, just like jet planes, we see them here in Chittenden County, and I also try not to fly. It's been about 5 years since I've flown also, but I still love flying, and I think it's jet planes are amazing. I just look at them and I'm always in amazement. And even coming from New York when I was a kid, watching them land in LaGuardia Field one every 3 minutes, amazed at every one of them. And tremendous regard and respect for the engineers and those that are responsible for them, and the automobile as well. So it's not that there's something about the technology I hate, but it's, I don't hate them at all. I do hate the way they're used in our culture. They're just used for the shortest of trips now. I say now pre-COVID. And transit suffers as a result. So even the local trips that one can make, and by the way, I want to say that just about a half hour ago, where I happen to live, there is a bus route that goes right by my house, and Jen, the electric bus went by. And I mean to ask you, please let me know when that's going to run so I can hop on it. Just I haven't been on one yet. Been in electric cars, but not an electric bus. And you can tell that when it's out there because it's so nice and quiet. It has this hum, like a little, it's not little, of course, but electric motor versus the diesel, much quieter and much nicer sounding, actually. So so to use transit, we need to have people, frankly, like some of the people right in this room and other activists who understand how important it is to use it, and to use it a lot, not once in a while. It really can be your primary mode of transportation. And if you find that as you start using it and as you walk, I mean, I know you all do that, and all advocates do that, but most advocates I know, when they need to go to Washington, they fly. And when they need to go to the West Coast, always fly. And Boston, drive. And New York, drive or fly, if they're in Chittenden County anyway. So these modes will continue to be a struggle to get more money for them and to expand them if the ridership does not increase. Because the ridership is still not very, even in Chittenden County, it's not very good. A bus is only saving energy when the average person mile is, well, the average number of people, on the bus mile is 10 or more. And so even here in Chittenden County, you will often see 10, 12, you'll see 20. Sometimes, precious few times, but sometimes you'll get on a bus and you have to stand. And I love that. And of course, rural Vermonters don't understand that when you see someone like me step on the bus and there's no seats, you give up your seat. Young people don't know that here yet. Because I think they do that less in New York now too. So what do we do to get ridership up? And this is something that Jen does a lot of good work on. So again, I don't think this is being so legislative, but rather, even though obviously much of these things result in legislation, but I'm not even thinking about a particular piece of legislation when I say that we should have fare free be permanent, because when the fare is free, ridership increases. And we've seen that in other places. And that study that I think Rob, the study, Rob, that you referred to, you were on the working group for the study, and thank God for that. That study says that Chittenden County would likely see a 40% increase in ridership. This is all pre-COVID. Would see a 40% increase in ridership if the whole system were fare free and always fare free. Right now, we have some systems around the state, including Chittenden County, but Chittenden County is there's almost no fare free. There's one bus that I know of, Jen, that's the College Street shuttle, goes up from UVM down to the lake through downtown, and that's free. And sure enough, that has good ridership, even though I wonder why those students can't just walk up the hill. But when the bus is free, people get on it. I would ask Representative Sullivan, I don't know, well, actually might be different than I am, but when I go to a reception, if it's a cash bar, I usually don't have a drink. When it's free, I always do. So more people will ride the bus. Now, a lot of that 40% and the other increases that are predicted are people who ride the bus usually, and they just ride it more often. Someone like me, you might go somewhere on the bus where you otherwise would have walked. So it doesn't, you will not see a reduction in cars traffic of 40%, but some of them do step out of cars. And when we do things like that put more buses on the routes, so they run more often, when you get to 30-minute intervals between buses, and when you get better than that, even a shorter interval like 15 or 20 minutes, that really increases ridership because it's dependable. And it is like the big cities where there's no schedule in the New York subway system that I know of. You just go to the subway station and you wait for the train and you get on it because there's going to be one there before too long. They tell you how many minutes you have to wait, but I don't think that was on any kind of schedule. So the schedules themselves are a bit of a problem. They don't confuse, but you have to have one with you. You have to know if you're in the right place. Most schedules do not list every single stop. That would be too long of a schedule. So you may be confused about where you are in relation to one of those stops. So I think fare free and increasing the service in rural areas. So I think I'll conclude there.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Kurt. At this point, hi, this is Steve here, and I'm gonna step in and moderate, see if we have questions, and feel free, everybody, if you have questions, to there is a little raise hand option under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, and or if you have a question, you can feel free to type it into the chat box, or just say in the chat box that you have a question. So let me first, Rob tells me that Emily has a question. So let me go to Emily.
Lovely to see no names and faces here, and a chance for me to re-engage in the sustainable transportation realm that I had the good fortune to play in for a few years. So, Kurt, I'm interested to know, I don't think there's legislation at this point, but whether or not the conversation about how we emerge from COVID-19 is actually including discussion around transportation alternatives. It's obviously very disturbing to appreciate that riding public transit and having the density of ridership was not only a problem in Vermont beforehand, but now that we need to distance is even more challenging for the long-term viability of public transit here. But we can't take this hit on the chin without looking at other strategies. It's wonderful to see so many more people walking and biking and getting around in so many different ways. Spring would help with that. But I'm also very interested to hear from you how those conversations are occurring in the State House and what are the best ways to engage in those conversations.
Okay, I don't know if we've had a whole lot of conversations in this, because there is no State House now, but on our Zoom meetings about that, I think we will in our committee. And I agree with you, Emily. Here in Burlington, and I'm finding people are telling me this from all over the country, that people are walking and biking. It's not just spring. I think Representative Sullivan would agree with me if she's been down to the bike path. As a matter of fact, I don't know. I think the city may have closed the bike path as it goes down on the waterfront because it was too crowded, and people. It was very difficult to keep your distance when this, especially if you're on a bicycle, and you're on this path that's only 12 feet wide, and it's so crowded. So. I think that more people are walking and biking than were, say, exactly 1 year ago. So it's not just spring. And then there must be a number of reasons for it. You know, the fact that some people that usually work outdoors are now working in their houses, and they're just dying to get outside, like I think we all are by the afternoon. But nevertheless, it's happening, and people are certainly enjoying it. And I think you're right, that if this is what you were getting at, Emily, that I think we'll see a resurgence in those two modes of transportation. And then, and again, here in Burlington, with the fare free, there's just some things about it that had not occurred to me before, Jen, except as Jen mentioned, the passengers, when you have a bus large enough that has a rear door, and frankly, coming from New York, I always see these things that, where Vermonters don't know how to do it quickly. And the driver literally, when an old guy like me gets on, he literally sits behind the wheel stationary until you get in your seat. That would be like impossible in a big city because the buses would just hardly move. But they don't use the back door usually. People walk past the rear door to the front door to get out. It's different now. Everybody wants to use those rear doors. And I watch them, I have a stop out here out front my door, and people are obviously using the rear door. I think they probably have to. Maybe the front door is locked, Jen, I don't know. But is the front door locked on the buses? No, not opened? Yeah, you're muted.
I actually don't know that it's locked. I don't think it's locked. I don't know offhand, because I think because of being able to have the lift for, say, a wheelchair, I think it's still open, but I don't know for sure. I can check.
Yeah, I'll bet the drivers are not opening them because they don't want the people walking in. So that big advantage actually remains an advantage and is good for transit after the COVID. I don't know if I've answered your question. Jen probably could answer that.
You're going to add
Yeah,
more, Emily?
yeah, just kind of like, looking at one of the challenges that public transit has is the first mile, last mile. And so walking or biking has been an alternative to that. So it's great that people get out on the bike path with quieter roads. I know there have various groups, Local Motion, of course, as well as others who are encouraging people to be out there today. So that can help you get the confidence to get off the bike path and also get onto the roads. So as we look at where do we emerge from COVID-19, how do you have strategies that can actually support sustainable transportation in Vermont until we can all afford to buy an electric car, then this first last mile issue is something that could actually get a boost from this, even while public transit itself is facing some significant financial challenges. So I'm just very interested, this obviously conversation is one that needs to evolve and emerge over the next few months. And Kurt, I'm delighted that you're there as chair of transportation with the experience that you have, and obviously a very strong support for making sure that we all have multiple transportation choices.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think in the urban areas is probably a little easier, or would be easier to manage with the bigger buses and, being able to space out and operationally, manage the demand. But in the rural areas where we have smaller modes and we were looking at opportunities like, micro transit, where it'd be on demand, smaller vehicles, at least until we have, lessened social distancing requirements, that would be a little more difficult. So, but I think there are still, and I don't know what the conversations are in the legislature right now around this, but I think, as you mentioned, the infrastructure pieces and first mile, last mile, everybody is slowing down and using these other modes. And so that may encourage folks to kind of have this multimodal experience. And so I think there is opportunity there, and maybe, opportunities for funding to work on the things that folks in this group I know have wanted for a long time in terms of sidewalks and bike paths, and so that there are more connections to more bike routes, bus routes as well. So. And I did see, I did forget to mention that, we are fare free right now. There isn't anything finalized for through the end of the year, but it is anticipated and expected that GMT will be fare free through the end of the calendar year with the COVID situation, but that's not yet confirmed. So.
All right. Well, great. Thank you. Let me go to Matthew. Matthew Burke has a question. Matthew, do you want to ask that question yourself, or?
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for having this conversation. And I'm on the energy committee here in Charlotte, and we just were asking people in our town what would allow them to ride the public transit more frequently. And I'm really glad to hear Kurt McCormick's points, because they were very aligned with what we had found, especially around increasing local service. Maybe that means local shuttles, something like that, more frequency. And those are the main ones, I would say, in terms of our conversation here. It seems the question I had was around the report. I was looking at that piece where it says total fare revenue in fiscal year 19 was about 2.2 million. I'm wondering also then if that's sufficient to look at as the gap that would need to be covered, or should we also be accounting for costs that are saved by not having to collect fares? Because obviously collecting fares does lead to reductions in time. There's people who are working in that time, and delays, the equipment when it fails, and so on. So I guess that was the one question. And then just more generally, just the this whole experience that we're in now really, for me, points out the opportunity really to reduce the overall need for high mobility, and so just thinking about that aspect of it too, like, do we actually all need to be moving around as much to still have a high quality of life? So thank you.
Good questions.
Just for everyone's reference, I put it in the chat box, the report that we're referencing. It was about how to increase public transit ridership. So that report is listed in the chat box for anybody who wants to find that. And then I can email it to everybody afterwards, the meeting as well.
So part of Matthew's question was about whether those sort of extra costs, collection, repair, delay, was that included in your estimates? You know, when you go with those millions of dollars, does that really make the system whole?
I can add a couple pieces. I know Kurt has some stats and data on this as well. So yeah, the 2.2 million is for Chittenden County. That's the loss or the cost, the fare revenue that we got a couple of years ago. I think it might be a little increased now since we had the fare itself change, so it may be a little higher. And then it's about 500,000 for the rest of Vermont, all the rural areas. So just under $3 million is kind of the fare loss. But then the GMT has looked at it. I don't have all the numbers off the top of my head, but the kind of what the internal cost for operation, I know it's not, it's not that significant. I think it's, maybe under even $100,000 just for kind of the basic cost and fare piece. That's not to mention all the fare boxes and either taking those out. But I know there's a lot of buses that need new fare boxes. So is it worth investing, say, $1 million into these new fare boxes when we could shift that money towards just fare free? But so that's a good question. And there, it's something that we certainly look at. And, Kurt has been advocating. I don't know if you want to speak more to that, but it's, I think the only other piece is then trying to increase the amount of routes and rides and service that we have would increase other operational costs. So, just having those funds, I know right now GMT hadn't been in the place financially to without additional funds coming forward to cover the fare free, wouldn't have been in a place to make that transition. But I know Burlington is also, at least pre-COVID, had been looking and the city council at ways in which at least Burlington routes could be fare free in a way for the city to help support that. But we'd need either, increased funding in some capacity to cover the costs. So.
Representative McCormick, did you have something to add to that?
Well, just, so Jen, I'm not allowed to advocate here. You can. No, maybe you can't either. I don't know. But Matthew, thank you for that question. And it's a really good point. There are, I think, a number of savings. Again, Jen would know what they were better than I do. But again, just envision that there's no more standing at, envision how much better the route runs, how much faster it goes, how it can stick to its schedule better when you being the driver, you never have to sit there waiting while somebody fumbles through their wallet looking for exact change or their card. And I've sat in the bus and heard the driver tell somebody, "Oh, that card's expired." And there's just, it's a complication. It takes a little time that goes away when you're fare free. And there are other savings, Jen. Well, I remember that GMT, and I hope you guys have not made this investment, looking at an $850 investment in the new technology for the cards on the buses. You would not need to make that investment if we were always going to be fare free. I assume eventually, because this is getting more popular, the city of Kansas City, Missouri is fare free now. As more cities adopt fare free, I think you'll be able to buy buses that don't have that on it. That becomes an extra, something you might be able to get still, of course, but you'd pay more for it. So there'd be a savings there in new buses. You look at that thing up by the driver, it's a pretty sophisticated machine. It's got to do a lot. It takes cash, it takes cards, and it tries to do it quickly. So I think it's just like with electric cars, a major savings that we don't talk about enough is just how much simpler the electric car is compared to the internal combustion engine. And therefore, it's a savings and a lot of savings in maintenance costs. Maintaining these machines, I've gotten on the link, and especially for some reason when I'm on the Montpelier side coming back home, and the drivers, I take out my card and I start to put it in, and he said, "Go ahead, sit down, it's not working." So you guys are losing a lot of revenues when those things stop working because you still run the bus and the driver just lets everybody on. We're fare free, but every person's got to be told that, instead of them just hopping on and taking a seat and taking off.
Yeah, I just thank you. If I can add one thing, you know, there are the operational, which I don't know if we have a figure for this, but you know, the sort of the more smoothness of the operations, as you say, Kurt, where, you know, riders can just get on and off and there's not that pause and delay. So you're making up how many ever minutes, then you can run the bus more frequently. Of course, with now the social distancing, there's that piece. But I did want to let folks know, one of the things I have been tasked with as a, you know, kind of COVID research project is looking at fare free. So if anybody wants to chat with me further about that or has, you know, insights studies, I am looking at that as kind of a side project and looking at the pros and cons. So it's in consideration, and obviously right now we are doing it. So.
All right, great, thanks. We've got a question from Peter. Peter, join in.
Thanks. I want to piggyback a little bit what Emily said in terms of first mile, last mile. And it would be a way to take advantage of people who may be biking, but help them get on the bus. I'm in a rural area, so it wouldn't work rural in my area, but I can envision in a place like Burlington, where you have either housing complexes or neighborhoods that are like a mile from the bus stop or 2 miles from the bus stop. You can put up little signs that say you're 2 miles away from the bus stop. Because I think if people see that as they're riding their bike around, they'll go, oh, wow, I could take my bike and get on the bus. You know, you can, if you know how to do it, you can look those things up in Google Maps and those kinds of things. But if it's right there in front of you when you're riding on your bike or you're walking, I think that's a big advantage. And the other thing I want to say, which I think is an opportunity here for people like myself who have to ride the bus, I think it's going to be a while before those people are going to be comfortable riding the bus. Just because a lot of people with disabilities are at higher risk for illness. So they may be more reticent as, you know, and I realize we're going to slowly go through this process of opening things up. And so therefore it may be an opportunity to try to ramp up the idea of ride sharing. And one of the things that I've learned from personal experience is that we need to figure out a process, and this is actually something I do pretty regularly, is teach people how to ask for that ride. It's not something that we naturally do. I mean, most of us, if you think about it, if you ask somebody for help in some way, it's always a little, are they going to turn me down? You know, you feel a little queasy about it or unsure. And there's certain ways to do it so that it's more successful than not. And so those are things we can try to ramp up to improve ride sharing for those people who may be comfortable in a car with one person and in a bus with a whole bunch of people, but still will enable them to get to where they need to go. And then even that process will hopefully make them more comfortable. And then if they need to, they can go back to riding the bus again. Thanks.
Great
So I just
question.
want to add a little story about Peter and I doing the exact same thing with the guy who drafted the public transportation report. Peter and I were both at a meeting and we both had our rides fall through. I took the bus there and Peter's ride wasn't leaving till later. So we both conned a ride, and we were fortunate because we both realized that we got to ask somebody else to get a ride. And so it's something that I think a lot of people aren't used to doing, is asking people for that ride. So thank you, Peter, for asking that question and making that point. So Steve, take it back.
Yeah, and micro signage, I love that. You know, getting inside people's experience might make the difference. Little differences that add up. Kurt or Jen, do you have anything to add to that, or should we go on to a next question?
I just wanted to say it's good to see you, Peter, and thank you for those points. I mean, I think that I definitely want to talk with you further when we do our survey to make sure that we're incorporating all of your insights into that. That's going to be critical so that we can make sure that we're reaching everybody that deserves and should be riding public transit. And just to put a plug out to the group that, you know, I also kind of the advocates who are trying to promote this, we want your ideas, or I do, I know Kurt does, I'm sure. So, you know, these sorts of ideas and really pushing forward to help, you know, push the legislature and, you know, talk with GMT about ways in which, and V-Trans, ways in which we can take this opportunity to, you know, educate and engage more people in riding. So I just wanted to thank you all and encourage that too, so.
Great, great. Well, let's go to Sean, who's on the phone, I think. Sean, I understand you have a question.
Hey, yeah, Steve, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, great.
Hey, so yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, I lived in New York City for 6 years, so I love public transportation. But, you know, with COVID making the obstacles even a little harder to conquer in rural Vermont for public transit, what else can we be looking at? I know like one thing with COVID-19 is people working from home. I mean, is there a way to offer incentives for businesses or even for the state to just have their employees not have to travel so far every day?
So you're talking about working from home, essentially.
Right, or just other ways to keep cars off the road. I mean, because it's you know, I being very for public transit, it's just not this year or next year that it's going to be able to expand.
Must be a tough challenge. Jen, Kurt?
Yeah, I think that that's another thing that I think we're learning from all the working at home that's going on now with the pandemic. It's been mentioned by a number of people on NPR especially these last couple of weeks, that a lot of people really like it and maybe had the option to do it before, but did not take the option. And then what was the name? His name is actually the person on the phone.
Sean.
Sean, yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that the legislature can do would be to allow this more among state workers. And it was legislation, it wasn't mine, it wasn't in my committee, but I forget what some of the obstacles were, legal ones, but they need to be overcome or removed, because you know, working at home, I think a lot of managers are suspicious that they worry that you know, the person's not going to do the work that they're supposed to do because they're home and there's nobody, their supervisor is, you know, 30 miles away. But I've worked at home for years, and I'll bet a lot of people on this call have, and you know that if you're consulting and so you're watching your time and your mother calls up and you chat for 10 minutes, you take that off off of your time. Whereas, do you do that when you work in an office and you're paid a salary, you're not paid, you know? I think the salaried worker at home probably they might at times be less efficient if they have children or just other things that are going to interrupt them, but they're going to work, and I don't think managers need to worry about that. I think they're going to work harder than they do when they're supervisors in the next cubicle.
Interesting. Well, this is an experiment in that, isn't it?
Yep.
Across the board. Yeah. Well, let's see. I think I want to go to Jack Cushman, who's part of our coordinating team here. Jack, can we go to you right now?
Sure, thank you. And what an interesting conversation. I've got a whole pile of yellow sticky notes with questions and 2 minutes left in our meeting. But I would like to synthesize a few things that I've heard about the density on the transit systems, about working at home, about the need for fare free, how are we going to pay for fare free? And it seems to me, as you all wrestle with these issues who are so immersed in them, that, and because of the economic situation that we may be facing here of a prolonged weak economy. It just doesn't look like this economy is going to bounce right back with this kind of job loss. That everything we do around climate and mass transit is going to have jobs really at the front of the considerations. People are really going to need jobs back. And it occurred to me that in this transit world that you've been describing, that both frequency of service and what the jargon that I heard was first mile, last mile, which I take it as the little shuttle bus that gets you to the big bus or something of that type. Those are two areas which would provide additional jobs and which would facilitate the return of workers to more distant jobs that they're going to have a hard time getting to otherwise. And I wonder if is there anything else that I'm missing, or how our two experts would view what are the big opportunities to jumpstart some jobs while we address these issues.
Sure, thanks, Jack. And I just wanted to put a plug in as well. I think that, I'm an advocate for all the telecommuting and all sort of modes of reducing our emissions. But I think, actually just talking with Rob the other day about this webinar, recognizing he was making a comment about now we're having to be even more diligent about cleaning the buses. And so that is opening up an opportunity for more work. And there's always been, I think it's becoming very clear to a lot of folks what really are the essential jobs, and the individuals who are on the front lines who are so critical, and that, drivers being one of them. And it's always been a difficult, process, I think, for a lot of transit agencies to find drivers, particularly those with CDL. So these types of opportunities, and then I think all of the spreading out of infrastructure, we're going to need to, if we're building more sidewalks and bike paths and all the connecting points to get us to merge public transit with just, the other walking, biking modes, that there might be opportunities on the infrastructure planning, and then, and building hopefully the microgrids that are going to support the electric buses that we're going to get. But, that's all sort of farther down the road. But I think just the more essential kind of construction and the bus drivers and these other, like I said, cleaning the buses and those services is what comes to mind offhand.
Well, thank you. I'm going to pass this back to Rob to wrap things up.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. Especially thanks to Jen Wood and Kurt McCormick for leading this conversation about the future of public transit. I just threw in here just some of the other resources, the two reports that are out there, the Public Transit Policy Plan, and then also the report that we kept referencing on the methods to increase the uses of public transit in Vermont. If you want a copy of that, please email me and I'll email them those links to you, because we may not have enough time to actually for you to type those out, but I will email those to you. Just want to let you know the upcoming conversations we're doing next Wednesday, how the pandemic is exposing environmental health disparities in the real context of Vermont's environmental injustice. Then May 27th, mega damage. June 3rd, we also are going to do a discussion with the Vermont Climate and Health Alliance. So, but also if you miss any of these events, if you go to the link down there, I can email you that as well. All of our conversations are going to be added to a YouTube folder, so you can watch them later on and share it with other people who weren't able to meet this conversation. I'm actually editing it down, so all the glitches that will happen in the beginning, you won't have, and things like that will be smoother and not as clunky as some of the conversation points. So at this point, I'm going to thank you again for Kurt and Jen for joining us. I'm going to end the conversation, and we're going to stay on just for a couple minutes to have any miscellaneous conversation. But please stay on if you want to talk a little bit more.